Czechia, when you study at a university, you need to go through something that's called a state exam. And a state exam is the last exam you have to take, the final boss, the end of your journey, the big boom. It's what stands between you and your diploma. It's your last chance to have a mentee be. And this video is mainly aimed at people who are going through these exams, and especially those who are taking the same exam that I did, Addictology. So basically, I did my bachelor's in Czechia in Prague, and I studied Addictology on the first faculty of medicine. But even if you're not planning to take these exams or you don't live in Czechia, I hope this video could be useful to you in one way or another. Even if it were just to learn a thing or two about how things work in Czechia or a thing or two about me. So in this video I want to go through what the state exam is, what was my experience, and any tips that I might have for anyone taking them. And I think even though you might not take this exam, all exams have something in common, especially the fact that they make people nervous. Naturally, if you're watching this video as part of your preparation for the state exam, double check everything I say. I took my exam in 2020, which is 5 years ago, and things might have changed since then, so definitely check if anything is still relevant. But I don't actually think that many things changed. So what even is a state exam? Simply put, a state exam is something that stands between a student and their diploma. Or a state exam and their thesis defense is what stands between a student and their diploma. It's the one last thing you have to do before you get to call yourself an addictologist. And these exams usually take place at the end of your third year, although some people choose to split some years, so it can take them 4 years or more, or choose an individual study plan, and then it's going to be highly individual. Some of my classmates did that, and I think it took them 3 more years to get to the point where they could take the exam. But usually the plan is that you take it at the end of your third year. And to be eligible to even register for the exam, I think there's some credit limit, and to be able to take the exam, you have to finish all your courses by some date that's probably going to be online. Usually you find information in the atrocious study information system that Charles University has. It's not pleasant, but if you try hard enough, you're going to find information there. When you take Addictology state exam, the exam is probably going to take place on the same day as your thesis defense. Or at least, in my case, it did. That also means that the same committee that is testing you is going to judge your thesis. And this system is a bit different to, for example, the one that I had at molecular biology, which is a different degree that I studied simultaneously. And the main difference is that for molecular biology, I actually had 14 days between the state exam and my thesis defense, and the committees were different. And if you fail, and I don't think this happens often, but if you do, you still have 2 more chances. So you can take the exams up to 3 times. Hopefully that won't be necessary. I found that the exam is currently held 3 times a year, once in spring, once in fall, and once in winter, which is a bit different from when I did it. I think we only had the spring and fall options. And compared to other state exams, and in this case I'm definitely just comparing it to the other state exam that I did, which is molecular biology and bioinformatics at the Faculty of Science. So compared to those, there's one huge advantage to the Addictology exam, and that is that you're tested or you're questioned on a predetermined set of questions. So you know in advance from which questions are you going to draw your final 3 that you're going to be answering. There are 3 areas, and you draw 1 question from each of the areas, and these areas are professional services in addictology, clinical addictology, and fundamentals of the main fields contributing to addictology. And as I said, there are 95 questions, 35 in professional services, and 30 in clinical addictology, and 30 in contributing fields. The questions are available on the clinic's website, so you can download them and you can prepare your answers and be really ready for the exam. And this is an oral exam, so you do have to prepare topics that you will speak on. And I would definitely recommend that you free up your whole day just to take the exam. I mean, yes, a couple of days before the exam, you get a timesheet with your time slot, but unexpected things can always happen. Like, you don't know what can happen. There could be a traffic jam, someone could jump in front of your train, or the person who's supposed to be tested before you just doesn't come. And you definitely do want to avoid unexpected delays. You do want to avoid running to the exam, and sweating is not fun in general. And you know what could also happen? There could be some last-minute changes to the schedule, and they could move your slot half an hour up. Ask me how I know. And to be fair, this did not happen to me at the state exam. It happened to me at a different kind of state exam that you have to do to finish high school in Czechia. And what happened was that, according to the schedule, I was supposed to go at 9, so I planned to be there early, just to have time to just relax and go for the questions for the last time. What actually happened was that they moved my slot to 8:30, so I had to run to the school and I lost all my prep time. Like, they allowed me to take the exam, but I lost my prep time, which is fair. And if I didn't plan to be there in advance, I would kind of lose the chance, I think. So I definitely do recommend you to be there early enough. Anything can happen. And taking the Addictology state exam was actually an okay experience. Compared to, for example, the molecular biology state exam, it was a walk in the park. The amount of information that you had to learn was significantly smaller, and my mental health was way better. And I mean way better. To be fair, the bar was on the floor. When I was preparing for my molecular biology state exam, my mental health was so bad, and I had several mental breakdowns a day. I suffered horribly, and then one day something kinda broke in my head, and I just couldn't take the stress anymore, and I don't know, it just snapped, and I couldn't be stressed anymore. I just had this feeling inside that no school is worth this suffering. And I actually managed to stay pretty calm for my Addictology state exam and for most of my bioinformatics master's degree, although I did struggle a lot when I was trying to finish my master's thesis in bioinformatics, but that's a whole different story. And I guess one of the things that helped me stay calm for my Addictology state exam is the fact that I already had a bachelor's degree, which meant that I could go to master's without any issues even if I failed the Addictology state exam, because in Czechia you have to do your bachelor's and then you can do your master's. So what I'm trying to say is that I understand that just stay calm is not a good advice, and my advice would probably be just power through it, suffer in silence, or cry, it doesn't matter. You have to power through it for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and then it'll pass, it'll be gone, and there's really nothing you can do about it. I mean, there are some techniques to handle stress better, right? But in general, I would just advise you to power through it if you can. But I hope that you know what's working for you, because what works for me might not work for you. But I think that short-term stress is not necessarily that bad. I mean, yes, it's unpleasant, but suffering for a couple of days or a couple of weeks is not going to harm you. Stress only becomes a problem when it's kind of chronic, where you can't calm down ever, and it starts destroying your life and you cannot focus on other things. Short-term stress before you take an exam, it's more or less fine, it's normal. And of course, I'm not trying to downplay how awful it is to be stressed and how awful it is to be stressed from school. I'm just saying that it's not worth stressing about. Just don't stress about the stress. You have enough stress in your life anyway. But back to my state exam. So I don't want to say exactly who was on my committee, because this is a public channel and I don't think the people would want to be associated with it or called out like that. But I knew everyone, they taught me, and on the day of the exam, they were exceptionally nice. And if I remember correctly, it went down more or less like this. So I came, I drew 3 questions, I got 15 to 20 minutes to sum up any of my thoughts and write them down so I know what I wanted to talk about, while there was someone else in the room that I think was currently being tested, and then it was my turn to be tested, and I answered the questions, and that's it. And then later that day I defended my thesis, and it actually went quite well. I got the best marks for both my thesis and the state exam. So let's talk a little bit about the questions I got. I drew definition and structure of a therapeutic community, predispositions, genetic and neurobiological factors, and social disintegration as a social event, social insurance, state social support, social care, corresponding benefits, and social pathologies related to social disintegration, homelessness, prostitution, human trafficking, etc. And I actually think that these were great questions. Regarding any questions that are about the healthcare system, I think those are great, because during your studies you actually have the chance to, or it is mandatory, it's not a chance, you have to do it, but you get to see all the facilities that are on the exam, so you can draw from both theoretical knowledge and your experience. Genetics and neurobiology was actually a great fit for me, because I kind of specialize in biology, like I did a whole different molecular biology degree, right? So it was just something that I knew about. I had the information and I was ready to tell them about it. They were happy with it. Everyone was happy. I think that many addictologists actually lack proper education in this area, but I think biology is super important when it comes to drugs. And the hardest question for me was social disintegration. It's not a bad question, but for whatever reason, I just can't remember this shit. I keep forgetting all the benefits, the pillars of support, the taxes. I don't think taxes are included in this question, but you know what I mean, understanding the structure of the state and how you can use it to benefit from it is something that I wish I understood, but for whatever reason, I am capable of learning it for an exam. I did it a couple of times, but the information always just, it's gone. I learn it, I take the exam, and then it, poof, it's gone. And I wish I knew it, I wish I understood it, because knowing these things is important. But anyways, my answer was good enough. And although 95 questions might seem like a lot, it's not really that bad. You're not starting from zero. You already studied these things. You already took tests that tested you on these topics. You should know this stuff. You should know at least 50%, I guess. Yes, you can forget some things, but you will not forget everything. And especially when it comes to addictology, which I think is a study program that sort of repeats itself a lot, the classes kind of draw from the same pool of information, so you always go for the same things in most of the classes. I don't know, it sounds bad, but it's not really that bad. I just think that a lot of things were covered in a lot of classes. So you should know at least something, you should have some notes, and it's not supposed to be that hard. And when I compare it to what the molecular biology state exam looks like, that's a whole different beast. For molecular biology state exam, there are no questions. You learn everything, then you sit down, and they look at you, and they ask you questions. You don't have any time to prepare. They look at you, they ask you, you answer, and then if it's a good enough answer, they ask you something else. If it's not a good enough answer, they keep grilling you on this one thing that you're not capable of answering. And I do see some advantages to this approach. I think it's a good way to test whether someone really understands the topics or whether they just learned, a set of questions. But from the point of view of the testee, it's horrible. And I definitely prefer just knowing the questions, learning the questions, and then when you draw the questions, you have time to prepare, and you can talk about what you prepared in advance, if you can remember it, of course. So how to prepare? Maybe not every tip that I give in this question is going to be useful to everyone, but I still hope that I will help someone or inspire someone. Since the state exam is taking place at the end of your third year, you should probably already know what works for you, what helps you study, how to focus, how to remember things, how to take tests. Like, these are all skills that you should have by now. For me, I know that I learn best when I write things down, so for most of my exams at university, I actually wrote everything down, and then I wrote it again, and then I remembered it. This approach simply wasn't possible to do for the state exam. It was just too much, so I had to switch to printing the notes and then highlighting them, and then maybe write a couple of notes here and there just to remember the key information. And for my Addictology state exam, I actually inherited my notes from someone who did them the year before. And I know that people frown upon this. I know that some people are against students inheriting notes from other students, but I don't think it's that bad. I mean, you have to learn the things anyway, and preparing the materials, yes, it's a great way of remembering the things, but it's also so time-consuming, and not everyone has time for that. And at the end of the day, you just have to remember everything. Doesn't matter if you wrote it down or if someone else wrote it down. I guess one disadvantage that I see is that you don't really know the source of the information. So there could be some parts that are wrong, but hopefully not. And this is actually one of the things that I really appreciated at the Faculty of Science, and that is the sharing culture that we had. Like, we had this huge disk full of notes that students made for other students, and then teachers would check it so there wouldn't be any wrong information, and it was awesome. And I think we should work on this culture of sharing, especially in areas that are not a zero-sum game. Like, if I do well in school, it doesn't mean that someone else suffers from it, right? We can all do well. And I think that building this community and sharing resources is a great way that everyone can do better. But it is quite possible that you can't just inherit your notes, or you don't want to. So what are your other options? So the good news is that by the end of year 3, you should already know a lot and you should have some notes. Plus, some of the professors actually share their notes or share their presentations. And I actually think that addictologists also have a drive where they share notes, but I'm not a part of it, so I can't tell you more about it. But I hope it's going great. And if you really want to dig deep, one of the best sources you can have for the state exam is actually this book, Clinical Addictology. It was written partially by people who teach at the university, and some of the chapters cover pretty much one-to-one your state exam questions. It is a bit expensive, and you're watching my English channel, but the book is actually in Czech, so maybe not that helpful, but it's a really good source of information. And I think that reading through this book is something that really helped me pass the exam this well. Although I don't recommend reading it like 7 days before the exam, I would ideally start earlier. Ask me how I know. And I also have some non-academic tips, like general tips. And my number one tip is that don't let this exam destroy you. It's just a school, it's just a degree. I know it's important, and I know that it's probably important to you, but in the grand scheme of things, you're probably going to pass. And I don't think you should give up everything that makes you happy just to study for the exam. Try to move a bit, even if it's just like a 5-minute walk around the block. And I think a lot of students have this need or this habit of unnecessarily torturing themselves, myself included. And I understand that you just want to focus on studying and everything else is not as important, but eating, sleeping, and moving at least a little bit is important. But to be fair, if you don't do any of these things, nothing bad is going to happen to you if you don't do them for like 2 weeks. Your body's not going to crumble. And I don't actually think that you should punish yourself for anything that you do in this time. I mean, maybe don't murder people or stuff like that, but eat that chocolate, smoke that cigarette. You know, the weeks before a major event are not the weeks that you should choose to change your habits, to change your diet, to quit smoking. You can do it afterwards. Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. And hopefully, you know what works for you. And if you don't, maybe this time is not the best time to experiment. But hey, there's always a good opportunity to get to know yourself a bit better. Consider it an investment. But that's it for today's video, so I hope you learned something new, something interesting, that this video helped you in any kind of way. And if you're preparing for any sort of exam, good luck, I'm rooting for you, you can do this. Eat the chocolate, sleep well, you have this, go you. And if you're looking for a new way to procrastinate, you could try my game. It's called Mushroom Match, and it's a relaxing puzzle game inspired by the fall forest and mushrooms, and it's available on both Android and iOS, and I'll drop the links in the video description. I made it myself and I would be really happy if you tried it. So thanks for watching, have a great one.